You typed an address into your phone this morning, and a calm voice told you exactly where to turn. Left in 400 feet. Take the second exit. You followed it without thinking, the way you follow it every single day, because somewhere along the line, the little blue dot became the only reason you can reliably get anywhere at all. Take the phone away, spin you around twice, and drop you 3 neighborhoods over, and there's a decent chance you'd stand on the corner, genuinely unsure which way is home. Now hold that thought against one small fact. You are a member of the only species that colonized the entire planet. Every continent except Antarctica. Frozen tundra, open desert, deep jungle, remote islands 1,000 miles from anything. Your ancestors got to all of it. On foot, in boats, with no metal, no maps, no writing, and absolutely no calm voice telling them where to turn. They crossed oceans you would not swim across on a dare. So here's the question this video is about. How? How did people with none of our tools spread across the whole Earth? And how did they do it so unbelievably well? The answer you were probably taught is the simplest one imaginable. They walked. Slowly. Humans wandered out of Africa a little farther each generation, drifting across land bridges, following herds, until after enough thousands of years they'd accidentally ended up everywhere. A slow, passive spread. Nobody steering. It just sort of happened. It's a tidy story. And it works fine right up until you get to Australia. Because you cannot walk to Australia. You couldn't do it then. And you can't do it now. Even at the height of the last ice age, when so much water was locked up in glaciers that sea levels dropped by more than 100 meters, and whole coastlines turned into dry plains, there was still open sea between Southeast Asia and the ancient Australian landmass. Deep water. Straits that never closed, no matter how far the ocean pulled back. And yet people were living in northern Australia at least 65,000 years ago. Sit with what that actually means. 65,000 years ago. Tens of thousands of years before anyone planted a crop, forged a metal, or wrote a single word, human beings looked out at an open sea with land nowhere in sight on the other side, and decided to cross it. Which means they built something to cross it in. Which means the slow shuffle story just quietly sank, boat and all. So let's throw that story out and start again. Because the truth is stranger, and a lot more impressive. Our ancestors were not passively oozing across the map. They were traveling deliberately, skillfully, and fast. That word fast matters more than it sounds. The image of migration as a glacial creep, a few miles per generation, doesn't match the evidence. Once modern humans left Africa in the push that every non-African alive today descends from somewhere around 50 to 70,000 years ago. They didn't inch outward. They followed the coastlines, and coastlines are highways. There's a route archaeologists call the Beachcomber Express, hugging the shore of the Indian Ocean, where food was easy, the path was obvious, and people could move generation after generation without ever solving a new survival problem. Populations that move along a coast can cover astonishing distances in what, on the scale of human history, is barely any time at all. A coastline is a road that feeds you as you walk it, and our ancestors followed it for thousands of miles. And that reframes the entire question. The interesting thing about our ancestors was never how far they managed to wander. Wandering is easy. The interesting thing is that they could cross, and navigate, and aim, that they had somewhere in them the equipment to look at a trackless ocean or an unmapped continent and find their way across it. Travel wasn't something that happened to them. It was something they were built to do. Let's stay with those first boats, because they might be the most underrated achievement in human history, and almost nobody talks about them. Start with the geography, because the geography is the whole argument. Southeast Asia, during the Ice Age, was a very different place. So much water was frozen into ice sheets that the sea dropped low enough to join Sumatra, Java, and Borneo to the Asian mainland in one giant landmass geologists call Sunda. Down south, Australia, Tasmania, and New Guinea were fused into a single continent called Sahul. So a traveler could walk an enormous distance across dry land that's underwater today. But between Sunda and Sahul, there was a gap. A line of deep ocean trenches that stayed flooded no matter how much water the glaciers swallowed. Naturalists call the boundary the Wallace Line, and it's so sharp that the animals on either side never mixed. Kangaroos on one shore, tigers on the other, separated by water that has been open for millions of years. To get across that line, you needed to put out to sea, not wade a shallow channel. Cross open water, with the far shore sitting below the horizon, invisible, on faith. Depending on the route and the sea level, we're talking somewhere in the range of tens of kilometers of open ocean, a distance where you launch from a beach you can see and aim for a coast you cannot. And people made it. The site is called Majid Bebi, a rock shelter in northern Australia, and when a team led by the archaeologist Chris Clarkson dated the oldest human tools buried there, published in the journal Nature in 2017, the number came back at around 65,000 years. Stone tools, ground edge axes, ground ochre, the debris of people living their lives on a continent they could only have reached by sea. Think about the sequence of things that had to happen for those tools to end up there. Somebody had to look at the ocean and believe there was land on the other side of it, with no way to see it. That belief alone is the hard part. Standing on a beach, staring at open water with nothing but horizon beyond it, and being certain enough that there's a shore out there to bet your life on the crossing. That isn't the instinct of a frightened animal fleeing danger. That's the mind of an explorer. Somebody had to build a craft seaworthy enough to carry people and survive the crossing. And it couldn't have been one lucky guy on a log, because you don't found a population with one person. You need a group, men and women, enough to keep a community going once they land. That means this wasn't an accident. It wasn't a fisherman blown off course. It was, in some form, a planned expedition, a deliberate voyage into the unknown by a coordinated group 65,000 years ago. Let that number sink in against everything else on the human timeline. The first cities were still 60,000 years away. Farming, writing, the wheel, metal, all of it, tens of thousands of years in the future. The pyramids are closer to us in time than they are to these voyages. And here are people with none of it, no civilization of any kind by our definition, executing an open water ocean crossing to settle a new continent. We tend to save our awe for the monuments, the pyramids, the temples, the things made of stone that lasted. But the first truly astonishing thing our species pulled off left almost nothing behind, because it was made of wood and reeds and nerve, and the sea swallowed all of it. The first great human adventure happened before anyone ever thought to plant a seed. So how does a creature with no compass and no chart find its way across an ocean or a continent it has never seen? The answer is that the chart was never external. It was in their heads, and we can now point to the exact cells that draw it. In 1971, a researcher named John O'Keefe was recording from the brain of a rat as it moved around a box, and he noticed something odd. Certain neurons in a region called the hippocampus fired only when the animal was in one specific spot. Move to a different spot, a different neuron fired. He'd found what are now called place cells, brain cells that each stand for a particular location, lighting up like a pin dropping on a map. Decades later, a Norwegian husband and wife team, May Britt and Edvard Moser, found the other half of the system, grid cells, which fire in a repeating hexagonal pattern across space, laying an invisible coordinate grid over the whole environment. Together, place cells and grid cells form something scientists describe, without exaggerating, as the brain's own GPS. The work was so fundamental, it won the Nobel Prize in 2014. What this means is that you are carrying, right now, a piece of neural hardware whose entire job is to build a map of the world and track your position on it. It runs whether you notice it or not. It is the reason you can close your eyes and point toward the kitchen. And it's the same equipment that let a person with no instruments hold a mental model of coastlines, star positions, and sea routes detailed enough to cross the horizon and come back. If you want to see how far that skill can be pushed, you don't need a time machine. You can look at the Pacific. The people who settled Polynesia navigated thousands of kilometers of open ocean between tiny islands using no instruments at all, reading the positions of dozens of stars as they rose and set, feeling the way distinct swells rocked the hull, watching the flight paths of seabirds at dusk, and reading changes in the color of the water and the shape of the clouds over unseen land. Wayfinding, it's called, and it was accurate enough to find specks of rock in a vast ocean, deliberately, again and again. It is one of the most sophisticated skills any human culture has developed, and it was carried entirely in the mind. And we know it works, because within living memory, someone did it in front of the world. By the 1970s, traditional wayfinding had nearly died out, and many scholars doubted the old ocean crossings had even been intentional. So in 1976, a canoe called Hokule, set out to sail the roughly 4,200 kilometers from Hawaii to Tahiti with no instruments at all, guided by a master navigator from the tiny island of Satawal named Mau Pielug. He held the course in his head, the rising and setting points of the stars, the direction of the swells against the hull, the signs of land long before it appeared. And he brought the canoe to Tahiti, where thousands of people came down to the beach to meet it. No compass, no charts, no GPS. Just a man, a canoe, and the map in his mind, proving that the thing our ancestors did was real, teachable, and repeatable. Set all of it side by side, and the picture converges from three directions at once. The archaeology says humans reached every continent but Antarctica, and reached them early. Footprints preserved at White Sands in New Mexico have been dated to around 23,000 years ago, pushing the human arrival in the Americas back further than many thought possible. The genetics says we all trace back to travelers who fanned out and kept going. And the living navigators of the Pacific show the skill wasn't a fluke of one lucky crossing. It was a teachable, repeatable human capability. We are not an animal that happens to travel. We are an animal built to travel, with the map-making machinery wired in at the factory, which is exactly what makes what happened next so strange. Because in the span of about 15 years, we took that machinery, the thing that carried us across every ocean on Earth, and we handed it to a device in our pocket. Here's where the story takes the turn nobody sees coming. For 65,000 years, the map lived in the head. Every traveler who crossed a strait or found a way home was running that internal machinery, building it, sharpening it, passing the skill on. And then, almost overnight, we stopped. The pivot has a date, more or less. In the late 2000s, GPS navigation went from a luxury in a few cars to a free app in every pocket on Earth. And it did something no tool had ever done before. It offered to do the navigating for us, completely. Not a map you read, a voice that reads it for you, turn by turn, so you never have to build the picture yourself. It's wildly convenient. It's also the first time in the history of our species that we handed the map-making job to something outside our own skulls. And the brain, it turns out, treats that hardware the way it treats everything else. Use it or lose it. The hippocampus, the seat of that internal GPS, is famously plastic. It grows with navigational demand, and it shrinks without it. The most cited example runs the other way. London taxi drivers, who spend years memorizing 25,000 streets, develop measurably enlarged hippocampi from the sheer effort of holding the city in their heads. Now run that in reverse. A team led by the neuroscientist Veronique Bobat has studied what happens when people lean on GPS instead, and the findings are blunt. In a 2020 study, habitual GPS users showed worse spatial memory when they had to navigate on their own, and the more they'd relied on it, the steeper the decline over time. We are, measurably, letting the muscle go slack. So here's the strange place we've arrived. We are the best traveled generation in human history. A person today can wake up on one continent and fall asleep on another, cross in a single day an ocean that took our ancestors a lifetime and a leap of faith. We have been everywhere, and most of us, stripped of the device, could not reliably find our way across our own city. There's a quiet irony buried in that. The ancestors who crossed oceans usually did it once, on a single, life-defining voyage, and knew every star and current involved. We cross oceans casually, dozens of times, and could not tell you which direction we flew. We have traded depth for reach. They knew a small piece of the world in their bones. We skim the whole of it and retain almost none of it because a screen holds the details so we don't have to. And it's not only the wiring, it's the nature of the travel itself. When every coastline is already charted, every mountain already summited, every hidden valley already photographed from orbit and pinned on a map, travel quietly changes from discovery into consumption. You don't set out toward an unknown horizon. You follow a route someone else already walked, to a viewpoint someone else already found, to take a photo nearly identical to a million others. The planet that our ancestors crossed without knowing what was on the other side has no other side left. The frontier is closed. There's nowhere on Earth the little blue dot can't already find. Nobody chose this, exactly. No one decided to trade away the inner map. We just kept accepting a tool that was genuinely, undeniably useful, one convenient turn at a time. But the machinery that carried human beings across every ocean on the planet is still sitting in each of our heads. And for most of us, For most of the day, it's switched off, waiting for a signal from a satellite that does the one thing we were most extraordinary at. So think back to this morning, and the calm voice telling you where to turn, left in 400 feet. You followed it the way you always do, and there's nothing wrong with that. The tool works, but now you know what it quietly replaced. Not just a paper map, a piece of you, the same navigating machinery that 65,000 years ago looked at an empty ocean and found the courage and the skill to cross it. Because that's the part that should stay with you. The people who settled Australia, who followed the coastlines out of Africa, who read the stars across the Pacific, and left footprints in New Mexico 23,000 years ago. They weren't a different kind of human. They were running the exact hardware you were born with. The place cells, the grid cells, the inner map that builds itself the moment you start paying attention to where you are. You didn't lose it. You came factory equipped with the same coordinate system that colonized a planet. It's in there right now, mostly idle, waiting. And maybe that's why so many people feel a restlessness they can't quite name, the itch to go somewhere, to get lost on purpose, to travel somewhere no app has pre-chewed for them. That itch isn't random. It's 65,000 years of ancestors who couldn't stay on the near shore, humming under the surface of a life where every road is already marked. It's the oldest instinct we have, still asking the oldest question, what's on the other side of that water? Your ancestors crossed the open ocean with nothing but the stars, the swell, and a map they carried in their own heads. You were born with that same map. The only question left is whether you'll ever switch it back on.